If you had the chance to live someone else's life, just to fix their problems, would you do it? Why or why not? The fluorescent lights of the publisher's office flickered faintly, casting fractured shadows over the rows of desks where muted voices and the scratch of pens filled the air. Ethan stood near the door, his worn jeans creaking slightly as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The rejection letter, stark and final, was folded neatly in his trembling hand, a small slip of paper that felt heavier than a mountain. His heart hammered against his ribs, loud enough to drown out the faint murmurs and the distant tapping of keys. The office smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paper, a domestic scent that only seemed to deepen his alienation. Ethan's eyes darted across the room, catching the indifferent faces of strangers engrossed in their own worlds, the soft glow of computer screens painting cold reflections in their eyes. He swallowed hard, the coil of anxiety tightening so sharply it nearly crushed his resolve. "I'm sorry, Ethan." The editor's voice came again, formal, rehearsed, void of warmth, the words cutting through him like a dull blade. "Your manuscript doesn't align with our current direction." Ethan nodded, forcing a hollow smile that barely masked the ache beneath. "Thank you for your time," he managed to say, voice brittle, cracked with exhaustion. The cold clang of the closing door behind him echoed down the silent hallway, marking the end not just of this meeting, but a tireless hope slowly fading. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual relentless energy, unaware of the crushing stillness that had settled inside him. He leaned against the cold brick wall outside the building, the harsh neon sign flickering irregularly above, casting his distorted shadow across the wet pavement. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, each drop splattering around his worn boots, soaking into his threadbare jacket. The sky was a bleak slate of gray, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight, mirroring the heaviness weighing down on his shoulders. The city's hum faded into a muffled drone, the distant sirens wailing like distant cries of desperation. Ethan's fingers flexed unconsciously, tracing the edges of the rejection letter like a lifeline slipping through grasping hands. His gaze drifted upward, catching the distorted reflection of himself in a rain-soaked puddle, a face marred by doubt, headlights blurring around him like ghosts. He bent closer to the water, eyes locking onto a fractured image distorted by ripples. A young man tethered to dreams now shattered, yearning for something beyond the suffocating routine, beyond the silhouette of obscurity that clung like a shroud. With a shiver, he pulled his jacket tighter, the damp chill sneaking beneath his collar. The air tasted of cold metal and forgotten promises. In the soft patter of rain, the city whispered indifference. He swallowed the lump in his throat, the weight of rejection pressing into a quiet fury, an ache that cracked open something raw and vulnerable within. The promise of words unspoken, stories untold, lingered in the mist rising around him, a silent echo of potential veiled beneath the cold, unyielding surface. Ethan straightened slowly, his eyes narrowing against the rain as a distant thunder grumbled softly, resonating with the turmoil stirring inside. The night stretched before him, vast, dark, and uncertain. And beneath the cloak of rain and shadow, a faint flicker of restless resolve stirred in the depths of his gazia, fragile beacon amid the gathering gloom. The dim light of the attic seeped through cracks in the ancient wooden beams, falling unevenly across dust-laden boxes and forgotten relics. Ethan sat on the edge of a creaky trunk, his hands clenched loosely in his lap, the sting of rejection echoing deep within his chest. Silence surrounded him, a heavy, suffocating stillness thickened by the stale air and the muffled rhythms of a small town brushing sleepily against the night. His breath hitched unsteadily as memories of the publisher's dismissive glance and clipped words played relentlessly in his mind. Every carefully crafted sentence, every spark of hope had met a cold, indifferent wall, and now all that remained was a chasm filled with doubt. The quiet ticking of an old clock, somewhere in the shadows, marked time like a slow, cruel heartbeat, reminding him how the world had moved on without him. Ethan's gaze landed on a cracked mirror leaning against a dusty wall. His reflection was fragmented, an image distorted by age and neglect, much like the fractured self he now traced in the chiaroscuro light. His eyes held a flicker of that deep curiosity, but it was tethered tightly now to an undercurrent of anxiety, a fear dawning that perhaps he was too small a flame to ever kindle something lasting. The attic was a sanctuary of shadows and secrets, a silent witness to moments forgotten. Here, wrapped in the whisper of past lives and hidden stories, Ethan grappled with the unbearable weight of insignificance. His fingers pressed into the worn wood at his side, grounding himself as the shadows whispered of lives unlike his own, a promise of escape or destruction. A sudden gust of wind sneaked in through the cracked windowpane, carrying with it a scent of rain and earth, the tempest beyond murmuring in restless tones. The stirring air unsettled the dust and lifted a faded scrap of paper from beneath a nearby box. Ethan rose, the movement slow, deliberate, drawn toward the fragile flutter of white. As he unfolded the note, the dim light caught ink that was nearly illegible, yet unmistakably inviting, an invitation veiled in mystery, hinting at the lives lived beyond one's own experience. His heart thumped with a cautious hope, a flicker of the adventure he'd longed for but feared. In the stillness, the attic seemed to hold its breath, the wavering shadows stretching toward the edges of the room like fingers reaching for something lost. Ethan's eyes flicked between the dark corners and the note in his hand, a subtle shift, a call to confront the unknown beneath the familiar. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then steadily, a rhythm against the roof, a symphony of melancholy and promise. He squeezed the crumpled letter, the edges tender against his skin, a tactile reminder that life teetered between surrender and discovery. In that suspended moment, beneath the dusky beams and restless storm, Ethan felt the fragile stirrings of resolve. A whispered question echoed in the space between thundercold. He unlocked the door to the hidden. Would he dare step beyond the boundary of his own reality? The attic clock chimed softly, marking the passage of time in deliberate, unyielding waves. And as the shadows lengthened and the night deepened, Ethan Moore sat poised on the cusp of a journey unlike any he had imagined, where identity and fate would meld, and nothing would ever be the same. The air in the attic hung heavy, thick with dust and the forgotten weight of years. Pale rays of a setting sun filtered through the narrow windowpanes, casting long, somber shadows across time-worn floorboards. Ethan stood amid disarray, battered trunks, yellowed newspapers, moth-eaten blankets. The room was a shrine to forgotten stories, a crypt of past lives, and beneath it all, he sensed an unsettling stillness that whispered of secrets waiting to be unveiled. His breath caught as something caught his eye, a glimpse of cracked leather beneath a worn blanket. He pulled it free with hesitant fingers, revealing a faded diary bound in weathered parchment. The ancient key, its intricate design dulled by time, dangled from the binding like a lifeline between worlds. The faint scratch of old paper greeted his fingertips as he carefully opened the diary, its spine reluctant but obedient. Pages filled with cramped, hurried script unfurled beneath the flickering glow of a single exposed bulb overhead, its wavering light painting slashes of gold and gray across the solemn room. His eyes traced the words, snippets of another life, lifelines from someone whose reality had long intertwined with the shadows. The diary breathed with the hidden depths of whispered stories and lives far removed from his own, yet unexpectedly familiar in their restless yearning. A sudden wind gust rattled the panes, lifting a stray page, revealing a hand-drawn map, cryptic symbols nearby, and a notation. To live another's life is to lose yourself, yet perhaps to find what was always missing. Ethan's pulse quickened, an electrical charge sparking in the hollows left by shame and resignation. For the first time since the sting of rejection, a fierce thread of defiance tangled with his fear, weaving a fragile resolve through the storm in his heart. He met his own gaze in a dusty mirror propped against the wall, the reflection fractured, shards of light and shadow caught in his eyes. Yet beneath the weight of worn jeans and vintage tea, in that wavering reflection, something old and new stirred, a quiet determination to step beyond the confines of his failing self. The diary's presence was an invitation, a gateway, a Keebeth promise and peril held delicately between the familiar leather covers. Outside, dusk folded into night, and the creaking old house seemed to inhale slowly, as if breathing life into the latent possibilities contained within its walls. The darkened skies hinted at rain, every distant rumble like a voice coaxing Ethan toward an uncertain horizon. His fingers tightened around the diary's spine, the edges sharp and worn, a tactile reminder of the journey that awaited. Shadows shifted, drawing closer yet strangely protective, as if the house itself knew this moment was the fulcrum on which fate would turn. His eyes lifted again to the key, its ancient curves gleaming faintly, an emblem of unlocking not just a door, but a self long obscured beneath layers of doubt and invisibility. With a breath as steady as the night, Ethan stepped deeper into the attic's embrace, the diary cradled against his chest, and the first stirrings of transformation flickered to life within him. And somewhere in the lingering twilight, the house held its secrets close, watching silently as a man began to unshackle his own identity from the shadows of the past. Night hung heavy over the small town, a thick velvet curtain muffling sound and swallowing light. Ethan paused at the threshold of the attic, the diary clutched nervously in his hands, its worn leather cover creasing beneath his fingertips. The solitary bulb overhead flickered uncertainly, casting elongated shadows that wavered like ghosts on the rough wooden planks. His breath came shallow, the tension firing through his veins with a mix of fear and something altogether more fragile, hope. The first tremors of adventure threaded through his doubts, and while uncertainty churned beneath his skin, a spark stoked itself quietly, coaxing him forward. With cautious hands, he opened the diary, the faint scent of old paper and ink curling up, faint and sweet. His eyes scanned the cramped handwriting, a world unfolding in ink, coated with secrets and subtle truths. Names, dates, grief, and joy woven together in stories both foreign and achingly intimate. The air grew thick with the scent of rain, distant rumbles rolling over the hills surrounding the town. The window rattled softly in its frame, drumming a steady rhythm against the tense silence. The attic felt alive now, watching, waiting. Suddenly, the pages whispered beneath his touchwords, stirring like leaves on a wind unseen, hinting at identities borrowed and lives changed. His pulse quickened, a shiver spiraling down his spine. The narrative was no longer just written, it was inviting him in. The room's scant light played tricks, himself reflected in fragmented shards of a cracked mirror propped nearby, the fractured image merging with the diary's spreading shadows. Ethan's eyes caught his own, curious, wary, on the cusp of surrender and discovery. A strange flutter in his chest, a tumult of longing and fear pulled him deeper, hands trembling as he traced the contours of a key drawn carefully on one page. The symbol spoke volumes, unlocking potential, unveiling the unseen, but also hinting at caution and consequence. "Who were you?" The whisper escaped his lips, carried through the dust-heavy air. Outside, thunder grumbled low, participating in the dialogue between man and fate, as the attic seemed to pulse in time with his rising courage. In a breathless moment, Ethan closed the diary, eyes shining with a fragile, fierce resolve. The swirling storm beyond clashed with the quiet certainty now growing like a seed planted deep in his heart. The room shuddered softly, perhaps from the wind, or perhaps from the unspoken promise of lives waiting to be lived. He exhaled slowly, the tension hanging in the air like a fragile noose, poised between past regrets and the precipice of transformation. And as the diary was carefully tucked beneath his arm, the shadows seemed to lean in closer, watching as a man began to unlock the door to his own unraveling identity. The old house breathed around Ethan like a living thing, creaks and sighs echoing through the narrow hallways, the cool air thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten stories. The diary, once inert and mysterious, now pulsed faintly in his hands as he flipped through its delicate, yellowed pages. Each word was a whispered promise, a gateway to lives that felt both tantalizing and horrifyingly real. His first venture into these borrowed existences had been intoxicating, a thrill of adventure, the rush of stepping beyond the boundaries of his own muted story. But the allure had begun to fade beneath the weight of unseen wounds. Faces he didn't recognize, mistakes he never made but now lived as if etched upon his flesh, a moral ledger he never asked to balance. Ethan's reflection flickered in a cracked mirror nearby, fragmented and uncertain. In his eyes, a silent battle waged the urgent desire to escape and the creeping terror of losing himself entirely. The diary's key, worn and cold beneath his fingers, felt less like a tool and more like a shackle. Outside, the wind howled softly, rattling the window panes with a cadence that seemed in tune with the pounding in his chest. The room seemed to pulse with the weight of unseen presences, shallow breaths in the dark spaces between the mournful shadows. His phone buzzed a message from a friend, a voice from the outside world begging him to hold on, to keep fighting. Yet even as he glanced at the screen, a coldness settled over him, the reminder of his isolation sharper than ever. Hours bled into one another as Ethan wrestled with the diary's insidious hold. Secrets surfaced, not only those of the lives he briefly inhabited but also fractures in the diary itself. Pages missing, names crossed out, stories ending abruptly. Betrayal writ large in ink. A faint note slipped from the diary's backbone, a hastily scribbled warning: not all lives are safe to touch. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Fear clenched his gut, but beneath it, a spark of defiance flickered. This was no longer a game of curiosity, it was a descent into a labyrinth fraught with moral peril and hidden dangers. The flickering lamp overhead guttered once, casting long fingers of darkness before steadying. Ethan leaned closer, tracing the faded script with trembling fingers. Choose wisely. The diary spares none. The room seemed to close in, shadows thickening like smoke. Ethan's breath came fast and shallow as the diary's truth began to unravel, a deeper nightmare, one where the lines between lives blurred, and the cost of interference escalated beyond reckoning. Unsure if the whispering voices echoing in the silence were real or figments of his unraveling mind, Ethan grappled with a chilling realization: every borrowed life left a scar, and some would demand sacrifice heavier than he could bear. The key, once promising freedom, now felt like a harbinger of doom, a symbol locked deep within the diary's sinister power. He closed the book abruptly, the thud echoing through the house. Heart racing, he looked toward the attic's dark corner, where the unknown awaited, and the boundary between his own life and borrowed identities thinned dangerously. Outside, the night deepened, stars drowned beneath a canopy of restless clouds. The diary's shadow stretched longer, and Ethan Moore stood at the edge of a precipice, torn between curiosity and dread. A note fluttered from the diary's pages, unseen until now, a final, haunting message: the cost of living another's life may be your own soul. And in that grim declaration, the attic fell silent once more, holding its breath as a man confronted a destiny far beyond his own. The attic was steeped in silence except for the soft ticking of an aging grandfather clock somewhere downstairs, a relentless march of seconds echoing in the vast, cold space. Ethan's breath came harsh and uneven, the weight of what he'd just uncovered settling like a stone in his chest. The diary lay open before him on the cracked wooden floorboards, its fragile pages whispering secrets more profound and terrifying than he could have imagined. He leaned in closer, eyes struggling to absorb the text that twisted his understanding of reality itself. The words were no longer just a gateway to hidden lives. They became a portal to something darker, something malevolent. Accounts of lives borrowed were more than fleeting takes on existence. They were imprisonments, and worse, traps for souls long lost. Images flickered across his mind, faces of strangers whose pain he had felt as his own, now revealed as echoes of unfinished business, desperate pleas for escape entangled within the diary's power. The realization dawned that the diary controlled more than just memories or perspectives. It held captive the very essence of those who had been pulled into its pages, their lives fragmented and tethered in a liminal space. His hands trembled as he turned to a new page, stained and worn, revealing a cryptic note tucked between lines: "Beware the mirroring self, what looks like salvation may bind you infinitely." The key beside him felt colder now, A bitter symbol not just of unlocking potential, but of unleashing irreversible consequences. Ethan's reflection in the attic mirror beside him shuddered, the fractured glass distorting his face into a mask of dread and determination. "Every life borrowed," he whispered, voice barely audible over the pounding in his ears, "is a story unfinished, a soul caught between worlds." Suddenly, a shiver ran through the room as if the house itself exhaled, shadows bending and twisting into shapes that defied logic. Ethan backed away, heart racing, the diary's truth clashing violently against his fragile sanity. A hidden note slipped free from the back cover, its ink smudged, the words stark and haunting: "To escape is to lose oneself. To return, a sacrifice of all that was taken." The attic light flickered violently, plunging the room into wavering darkness and sickly yellow before steadying once more. In that oppressive silence, Ethan realized the gravity of his own predicament, a terrifying awakening that meant any journey into another's life demanded a reckoning far dearer than he'd ever imagined. He clutched the diary tightly, scarred fingers digging into the binding, a symbol of his now unshakable connection to the lives intertwined with his own. And then the sound of footsteps, faint but growing nearer, echoed through the house, a reminder that his own reality was slipping inexorably away. Breath caught, Ethan stared at the mirror. For a brief, chilling moment, his reflection smiled back at him, not his own smile, but another's, a warning etched in shadows. The moment shattered his last illusions. He was no longer merely a reader of stories but a prisoner of the diary's dark covenant, stranded between borrowed lives and the relentless hunger of the void. The attic swallowed his whispered confession, the gate between worlds creaking open anew. And Ethan, trembling yet resolute, stepped forward into the abyss that awaited. Night had long claimed the small town, swallowing the cracked roads and the pale glow of street lamps in its mute, suffocating embrace. Inside the old house, Ethan hovered on the precipice of a crushing abyss, the weight of fractured identities bearing down like lead on his chest. The rooms around him, once filled with the faint warmth of possibility, now dissolved into cold shadows, the air thick and unmoving. He sat on the wooden floor of the attic, the diary lying open but forgotten beside him as his gaze sought nothing but the dark, endless ceiling. The once vibrant lines of narrative and promise blurred under the veil of his despair, an endless echo of borrowed lives colliding, fracturing, and fading like smoke dissolving in cold air. The wind howled through the broken panes, dragging in the scent of rain-soaked earth, its chill creeping beneath the threads of Ethan's faded t-shirt, biting at him with merciless persistence. He pulled his knees tight against his chest, a gesture of protection that felt increasingly feeble in the vast silence. His reflection caught in the cracked mirror propped against the attic wall, a visage etched with anxiety, lines forming not just on skin but carved deep within an unraveling soul. The mirror's fractured glass refracted his image into 1,000 shards, each a fragmented self lost in the labyrinth of shifting realities. A soft, almost inaudible sigh escaped Hema, breath empty of hope but laden with raw, existential exhaustion. Eyes closed, he traced the contours of his scarred hand, fingertips grazing the faint ridges left by lives lived under the diary's enigmatic will. Each mark a reminder, a tether to identities not fully his, a debt of spirit too heavy to bear. The house groaned around him, a symphony of creaking wood and whispering shadows that seemed to echo the turmoil within. The diary's pages fluttered lightly under a ghostly breeze, a silent reminder that the printed words carried weight beyond mere ink and paper. Voices once vibrant in his mind, their desires, regrets, and unfinished stories now melded into a haunting chorus of loss, forcing him deeper into isolation. The relentless ticking of a distant clock counted down not just moments, but fragments of a self slipping away into the growing void. His body trembled with quiet despair, every breath short and tentative, as if the simple act of drawing life was an insurmountable challenge. No words came to soothe, no light beckoned, only the endless dark pressed in, ice-cold and unyielding. In the cold silence, Ethan Moore surrendered to the unraveling, a solitary figure engulfed by shadows, tethered to lives yet severed from his own. And beneath the flickering lamplight, the diary's key lay abandoned, a silent testament to power lost, identity shattered, and a future uncertain beyond the grasp of even the boldest hope. The night pressed down like a heavy velvet shroud, muffling sound and casting the small, rustic house into near absolute darkness. Ethan sat huddled on the cold wooden floor of the attic, the peeling paint and dusty beams closing in on him like a tomb. His breath came in slow, shallow gasps, each exhale a visible mist in the cold air that struggled to find warmth in this forgotten space. Around him, the silence was absolute except for the faint creak of the house settling, and the distant drip of water from a leaky pipe. The shadows pooled in the corners, thick and suffocating, swallowing even the faint, flickering glow of the attic's bare bulb. His eyes, bloodshot and glassy, stared blankly at the cracked mirror propped against the wall. His reflection was fractured and distorted by the cracked glass, a broken image of a man dissolving into shadow and oblivion. The flickering light cast warped facets of his face, and in those distortions, Ethan searched for a sign of himself but only found emptiness. The diary lay open at his side, pages fluttering faintly in a draft that snuck through the old beams. The ink seemed to blur and bleed with each tense moment, as if struggling to hold fast to the fading truths it contained. The diary's leather cover had cracked with age, like the delicate boundary between borrowed lives and the self, now eroding under the relentless weight of endless shifting realities. His hand rested limply beside the diary, fingers trembling, skin pale against the cold wood. He flexed them slowly, feeling the sting of phantom touches, remnants of lives he'd lived but never fully claimed, stories that clung to his skin like shadows refusing to dissipate. A broken key lay discarded near the diary, a stark symbol of promises unmet and doors sealed forever. Ethan's gaze drifted to it, the metal dull and cold, its jagged edges an echo of the fractures splintered deep within his fractured identity. His lips parted, a whisper escaping in the stillness, bare and raw. "Who am I?" The question hung suspended, unanswered, swallowed by the heavy air. Outside, the wind rose, moaning through the darkened trees like a mournful lament. The house groaned in response, a lonely shudder of existence in a world indifferent to his suffering. Ethan's breath caught again as the silence stretched unbearable, a cavernous void threatening to consume every trace of hope, every flicker of strength. In this exhausted stillness, the attic became a sanctuary of decay, a prison built from regret and lost selves, where time seemed frozen and the future dissolved into endless black. His head dropped forward, chin resting on his chest as the weight of countless borrowed lives pressed down, the unfinished stories and unresolved echoes chaining him to this profound desolation. And in the absolute quiet, beneath the flickering bulb's weak halo, Ethan drifted toward surrender, a soul dangling on the edge of oblivion, suspended between the fragmenting past and a future swallowed whole by darkness. The attic lay ensnared in the deepest shadows, broken only by a single crack of moonlight filtering through the dusty window, casting a pale rectangle across the floorboards. Ethan sat motionless on the cold, splintering wood, the diary lying open but neglected at his side. His gaze was distant, glazed, unseeing, a man adrift in a sea of fractured identities and unresolved guilt. The heavy silence pressed in on him, swallowing sound until only the faint rustle of the pages from the lingering draft remained, soft and elusive, like a whispered secret from the past striving to be heard. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, mothballs, and the intangible weight of years spent untold. His fingers, trembling but reluctant to move, hovered over the fragile diary's yellowed pages. With painstaking care, he traced the faded ink names and dates, lives lived and lost, each a fragment suspended in time. The key, long hidden beneath the pages, gleamed faintly in the moonlight, cold and heavy with silent promise. As Ethan's eyes roamed the map tucked within the diary, a sudden stir of recollection ignited a flicker deep inside, a memory of another time, another self, standing beneath sunlight with eyes wide open. It was a glimpse of possibility, fragile as the wavering light of the attic bulb earlier, but unmistakably a pulse of life beneath the suffocating darkness. The mirror propped against the wall caught the moonlight and reflected himself back to him, not the fractured shards of before, but a subtle, soft sparkle of recognition. For a moment, Ethan's chin lifted, and his breath steadied, the weight of despair loosening just enough to allow a whisper of hope to resurface. His voice broke the silence, minimal yet piercing. "Perhaps there is a way back." The words fell into the stillness, untouched but powerful, a silent vow, the fragile first step in reclaiming the paths he had lost. The old diary, once a cage, now seemed a doorway, a riddle posed by the past, inviting him to confront the unknown. Outside, the first hesitant bird call broke through the pre-dawn air, gentle and sure, threading through the quiet shroud of the night. The attic, long a prison of shadows, suddenly felt like the threshold of renewal. Ethan closed the diary with a slow, deliberate breath, the key cold and sure in his hand. The journey ahead remained fraught with peril and uncertainty, but within the depths of his aching soul, a glimmer had ignited the faintest yet unyielding light. As he rose unsteadily to his feet, the wavering shadows cast by the moonlight seemed to part, making way for a path unseen yet deeply felt. And in that profound silence, amid the creaking whispers of the old house, Ethan Moore took a silent, resolute step toward reclaiming not just the borrowed lives he had lived, but the life that was truly his own. A faint glimmer of dawn seeped through the narrow cracks of the old house, casting a hesitant golden hue upon the dusty attic. Ethan stood amidst the clutter, his figure stretched thin, eyes unfocused yet burning with a fragile spark of resolve. The diary lay open on the battered wooden table, its pages illuminated by the first gentle light, revealing words still trembling from before, a whisper of hope amid the shadows. His hand hovered over the diary, trembling as he hesitated, then slowly gripped the worn leather binding. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper, the quiet hum of the house's old pipes, every creak and whisper a reminder of long-forgotten stories. Ethan's breathing was steady now, a deliberate attempt to calm the storm within. Outside, the evidence of dawn remained tentative, barely more than a glow spilling over the horizon, promising renewal but still shrouded in hushed uncertainty. The room seemed to breathe with him, shadows retreating just enough to leave the faintest shimmer of possibility. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the pulse of something ancient and yet painfully new, an awakening buried beneath layers of despair. The words from the diary echoed softly in his mind, a guiding light. Asterisk, to find oneself, one must first confront the shadows. Asterisk, a single tear traced down his cheek in unspoken acknowledgement of loss and pain and the quiet, persistent hope to move beyond. His fingers traced the edge of an old key resting beside the diary, the symbol of unlocking potential, of opening doors both literal and metaphorical. Slowly, he lifted the key, its cold weight grounding him amid the fragile illumination. The house's old wooden beams seemed to exhale softly, as if sensing the stirrings of a rebirth, a spark that had long flickered but never quite died. Across the room, the cracked mirror reflected his image, a fractured self softened by the dawn's tentative promise. Ethan looked into his own eyes, seeking the truth beneath the layers of doubt, regret, and fear. "It's not too late," he whispered, voice barely more than a breath. The words felt like an incantation, a promise to himself and the shadows that had haunted him. A gentle wind stirred the dust and shadows, guiding his gaze outward toward the horizon now tinged with the delicate pinks of sunrise. The world outside was still awakening, yet within this space, a quiet revolution was beginning. He reached for the diary once more, the pages trembling as they caught the early light, a fragile promise of tomorrow. The words on the pages shimmered softly, beckoning him forward, whispering of second chances and the shadows that could be cast aside. Ethan's hand rested on the diary, fingers curling around the worn leather as if clutching a lifeline. The house's silence embraced him, heavy yet tender, holding space for the unfolding rebirth. And in that moment, beneath the fragile glow of dawn, Ethan Moore took his first deliberate step toward reclaiming himself, an act both small and monumental, marking the beginning of a path that could lead from darkness into light. The attic was alive with a fragile tension, the air trembling as Ethan's fingers brushed the worn leather of the diary. The faint glow of dawn seeped through the cracked window, casting long pale shadows that seemed to stretch out to beckon him forward. His deep-set eyes, clouded with despair moments before, now gleamed with a fragile resolve, an ember ignited amid ashes. Slowly, he lifted the diary, the weight of it grounding him in the reality of his choice. Every creak of the house's ancient beams and every whisper of wind outside felt like a silent chorus urging him onward. The pages, yellowed and delicate, seemed to shimmer with a newfound purpose, callings from lives long intertwined with his own. He turned the pages with measured care, words swimming into focused memories, regrets, and silent hopes of souls lost in the dark corridors of the diary's labyrinth. As he read, a spark of understanding ignited in his chest. This wasn't just a conduit for borrowed lives, but a mirror of his own buried truths, waiting to be unearthed. A gentle breeze stirred the attic, flickering the lone lamp overhead. Shadows danced across the walls, crafting fleeting images of past selves and futures that could still be reclaimed. Ethan's gaze fixed on the mirror leaning against a battered wall, fractured yet reflective of his fractured soul. For a moment, the split glass parted, revealing a glimpse of his true self, a flickering beacon amid the dark. "I can choose," he whispered, voice trembling but resolute. "I can reclaim what's mine." His hand, trembling yet determined, reached for the old key hidden beneath the pages, a symbol of unlocking potential and confronting danger. His fingers brushed against the cold metal, igniting a shiver that traveled down his spine. The house itself seemed to breathe with him, sensing the shift, the awakening from darkness to dawn. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cool, awakening air, and slowly stood. Every muscle tensed in quiet anticipation, the cracks in his armor mending, a fragile new strength blooming from the shadows. The diary was now more than a relic of chaos, it was a promise of transformation. Outside, the first light of sunrise bathed the landscape in a gentle glow, a promise of hope stretching beyond the fragile walls of the house. Ethan gazed out and saw the horizon unfolding in hues of gold and pecan, invitation to step beyond the darkness. With a steady hand, he lifted the diary, the key, and the mirror symbols of his journey and his emerging self, and moved toward the door. Each step was deliberate, each breath a testament to the quiet courage that had been reborn in the depths of despair. He paused, hand on the doorframe, feeling the weight of all he had endured, on the strength of the man he was becoming. The house was silent now, but inside him, a storm of hope and fear, of doubt and resolve, surged like a wave about to break. Yet, even in the uncertainty, one truth shone brightly: he had begun to reclaim his destiny. The door swung open, a gentle creak into the light, an exit from darkness, an entrance into possibility. The room was awash with golden morning light that spilled through the cracked panes of the old house, casting a halo of warmth and clarity over the dim shadows that had once haunted Ethan's fractured mind. He stood upright, the final remnants of despair dissolving into a quiet strength. The diary lay closed on the battered table, its dark leather now seeming less like a prison and more like a vessel for liberation. Across the room, the mirror reflected a face refreshed, a man reborn from the depths of agony and resurrection. The fractured reflections had aligned once again, shards of broken self mended by resolve and understanding. His unkempt hair was smoothed, and his eyes, once haunted by guilt, now shone with a calm proportion, unwavering resolve to confront the darkness within and forge his own path. He reached out, fingers trembling slightly, and gently touched the diary's cover, an artifact of borrowed lives, but also of personal awakening. The symbols, the key, the mirror, each had played a role in guiding him to this moment of truth. Ethan's stance was firm, steady, an unspoken vow echoing in the silence. His voice, low but resolute, broke the stillness: "I choose myself." Outside, the world stirred with a gentle hum of awakening life. The distant calls of birds, the first touch of sunlight, and the soft swirl of wind through the branches painted a picture of renewal. Ethan's gaze shifted to the window, where the horizon stretched infinitely, a symbol of the journey not ended, but transformed. He moved toward the house's threshold, the weight of the past lifting like fog at dawn. The shadows receded, retreating before the undeniable light of his newfound purpose. Every step was deliberate, each one a testament to the battles fought and the self reclaimed. Pausing at the doorway, Ethan looked back one last time, the house silent but alive with history, stories he had lived, lessons he had learned, and the truth he had finally embraced. The key was fitted into the lock, not just unlocking the door but sealing his commitment to truth and to himself. Outside, the first rays of sunlight bathed the landscape, casting long, golden strokes across the earth, an eternal symbol of growth and continuity. The scene held a moment of stillness, a breath of serenity in the chaos of life. And so, Ethan stepped beyond the threshold, into the promise of morning, into the light of a soul reborn, face calm, eyes steady, ready to face whatever destiny awaited with unwavering purpose, the shadows forever released. Dawn's gentle glow spilled softly through the window, casting a warm, golden hue over the modest room where Ethan sat quietly. The familiar scent of earth and fresh morning air mingled with the faint echo of his breath, calmer now, but weighted with a quiet sense of resolution. The scars on his hand caught the dim light, a subtle reminder of the lives he'd touched and the lessons he'd learned, etched into his skin beneath the surface of his awareness. He gently traced the scar with his fingertips, feeling an unspoken connection to the countless stories lived through his borrowed existence, a silent acknowledgement of the moral weight he had borne and the boundaries he had crossed. The diary, once a conduit of chaos, lay dormant on the table, its dark leather cracked but no longer a prison. Instead, it was a relic of transformation, now silent and still. Outside, the world awakened in quiet harmony, the chirping of birds, the rustling leaves, the distant hum of life reuniting with itself. Ethan looked across the modest room, the subtle glow illuminating the contours of a space once haunted by shadows, now turned into a sanctuary of growth. His gaze drifted to the small sapling that he had planted the day before, a fragile sprout reaching upward, tender and determined. It was a symbol of rebirth, a testament to the new beginning he embraced with a renewed sense of purpose. With deliberate movements, he reached for a mug of warm tea, the steam curling upward like a soft prayer to the universe. A deep, calming breath settled into his chest, the quiet steadiness of his heartbeat echoing an unspoken vow to move forward with integrity, to cherish his own truth, and to honor the lives intertwined with his own. The shadows of doubt, betrayal, and despair dissipated into the dawn, replaced by a gentle warmth that suffused his being. He rose slowly, the subtle creak of the old floorboards grounding him in the present moment. Standing by the window, he watched the horizon unfold, vast, infinite, filled with uncharted promise. The world outside was still, listening, waiting. In that stillness, a profound peace revealed itself, a gentle acceptance of the past, a recognition of the growth achieved, and an unspoken trust that life would continue, renewed and unbreakable. Ethan's gaze lingered on the horizon, a small smile curling at his lips, a quiet affirmation. He had begun the journey of rediscovery, of reclaiming himself from the shadows. As he closed his eyes for a moment, he felt the weight of history and hope intertwined, a peaceful dawn after the storm, a silent promise of new life. The morning sunlight poured through the window, casting a gentle glow over the small, quiet room where Ethan sat. The familiar sight of the tree outside, its leaves shimmering softly in the new light, mirrored the subtle shift within him, a quiet openness to acceptance, growth, and healing. His hand, resting on his lap, bore the faintest scar, a memory etched by the lives he had borrowed, now a silent testament to the lessons learned. Ethan's gaze lingered on the branches swaying outside, each leaf a symbol of resilience and change, a reminder that while the past had pulled him into chaos, he now stood rooted in the present, steady and calm. He reached out, gently touching the bark of the tree, its textures rough yet nurturing, filling him with a sense of continuity and hope. Every line in his face, once marred by despair and doubt, now softened into peaceful lines of understanding. The journey had transformed him from a man lost in shadows into a keeper of his own story. The room seemed to breathe in the same rhythm, silent, patient, waiting for a new chapter to unfold. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, breathing in the scent of earth and fresh morning air, and exhaled a quiet release on unspoken forgiveness for himself, for the chaos, for the lives he had touched, and for the one he was reclaiming. His fingers brushed the surface of the diary, now closed and resting gently on the table. It was no longer a tool of chaos but a vessel of wisdom, a symbol of the delicate balance between living and letting go. Faith in himself grew stronger, buoyed by the realization that the cycle of borrowing and release had found its natural pause. A faint smile appeared as he looked toward the horizon through the window, a shimmering line where sky met earth, promising infinite possibilities. There was no longer a sense of loss or regret, only a quiet confidence, a deep knowing that his story, his true story, was his to write. He stood slowly, the weight of yesterday lifted, and took a deliberate step toward the door. The house, once a prison of shadows, now felt like a sanctuary, an unspoken home for the journey that had brought him here and the journey still unfolding. As he pushed open the door and stepped into the sunlight, the world outside welcomed him with open arms, the breeze whispering softly, the leaves shimmering in quiet applause of his newfound peace. Ethan paused for a moment, breathing in the moment's stillness, finally at peace, finally whole. The scene lingered on him, standing there, a silent figure of renewal against the awakening landscape, a testament to the profound transformation, and ending not with tears, but with quiet, lasting hope. The sky was painted with the gentle hues of dawn, a tender whisper of renewal that seeped through the window of Ethan's quiet sanctuary. The light fell softly on the branches of the tree outside, its leaves shimmering with a subtle, golden brilliancy, a living symbol of rebirth and continuity. Ethan sat on the porch, the cool wood beneath him grounding and soothing, as if nature itself had paused to witness his transformation. The scars on his hand, faint yet persistent, rested like quiet reminders, markings etched into flesh, echoes of borrowing and lessons learned. They shimmered subtly in the early light, reflections of a life intertwined with others, now integrated into his true self. His gaze lingered on the tree, its trunk sturdy and unyielding, branches reaching outward into the unknown, embracing the future without fear. A gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of earth and leaves, whispering stories of growth, resilience, and hope. Ethan reached out, fingertips grazing the bark softly, feeling the pulse of life beneath the surface, symbolic of his own awakening, the quiet strength of standing rooted yet reaching toward new horizons. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the silenced world, each inhale a prayer for peace, each exhale releasing the shadows that once held him captive. The house behind him was still, a silent witness to his journey from darkness to light, an unspoken testament to the unbreakable human spirit. The scene lingered on him, sitting there, a figure of quiet hope, amidst the golden dawn. The tree, steadfast and unchanging, stood as a symbol of growth and perseverance, an eternal reminder that even in the face of chaos, life persists. As the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the landscape, Ethan's face softened into a gentle, knowing smile. He had traversed the labyrinth of shadows, embraced the pain, and found himself again in the quiet, unshakable core of authenticity. The camera panned upward, capturing the infinite sky beyond the vast expanse of possibility, promise, and peace. In the stillness of that moment, time seemed to pause, a silent hymn to new beginnings, the end of a tumultuous chapter, and the dawn of something eternal. Would you return a borrowed life or keep the dream alive?